In the 2nd century BCE, Judea found itself in a period of intense change, caught between political, religious, and cultural forces, with the Roman Empire exerting substantial control over the region. The military might and taxation imposed by Rome severely limited local autonomy, especially affecting regional leadership. Jerusalem's temple, the heart of Jewish spiritual life, also became the center of fierce power struggles. It wasn't just a sacred place, it was a powerful institution that held significant political and economic influence. The temple drew thousands of pilgrims, making it a focal point for both Jewish religious leaders and Roman authorities. High priests, who held a unique role within the religious hierarchy, had to navigate a delicate balance between their spiritual duties and the need to appease Roman rulers, aiming to maintain stability in the region. In this environment, figures like Annas and Caiaphas rose to prominence. They weren't just religious leaders, they became essential political players, instrumental in preserving order and exercising control over the temple. Annas was particularly influential when he assumed the role of high priest. His impact is noted in the Bible, especially in relation to pivotal moments in Jesus' life. Luke 3 verse 2 mentions both Annas and Caiaphas as religious authorities during John the Baptist's ministry, emphasizing their extended influence. Even after Annas was officially succeeded by his son-in-law Caiaphas, his authority remained strong. This enduring power was largely due to the dynasty he established, where both he and his sons held key positions within the temple's hierarchy, ensuring continuity of influence. Annas wielded such control over the Temple of Jerusalem that he oversaw daily rituals and sacrifices, making sure they adhered to Jewish law. In John 18:13, it's noted that after Jesus' arrest, he was first brought to Annas, even though Caiaphas was the official high priest at that time. The dominance of Annas and his family illustrated the intricate relationship between Jewish leaders and the Romans. Annas wasn't just preserving religious traditions, he was also building a political alliance that helped the Jewish people survive under Roman rule. His son-in-law Caiaphas would later play a crucial role in the trial of Jesus. Annas' influence wasn't limited to religious rituals. He also exercised extensive control over the temple's financial operations, which held great importance due to the influx of pilgrims. Each year, thousands of Jews traveled to Jerusalem from distant regions, bringing with them foreign currencies that needed to be exchanged for temple currency to make offerings. Annas managed the currency exchange system, turning it into a profitable enterprise. However, this practice led to widespread perceptions of corruption. In the Gospels, we read how Jesus reacted strongly to the sight of money changers and animal sellers within the temple, accusing them of turning God's house into a den of thieves. Matthew 21 verse 12-13. Although Annas is not directly mentioned in these accounts, his oversight of the temple's financial dealings suggests that his influence was behind these practices. This association partly explains the animosity Annas and other religious leaders felt toward Jesus, whose teachings directly challenged their authority and exposed their greed. By aligning himself with Annas' powerful family, Caiaphas cemented a political alliance that would secure his position in Judea. His appointment as high priest wasn't simply a matter of religious duty. It was a strategic move that reinforced his authority within the priestly elite. The dynasty Annas established ensured that his family would control the high priesthood for several generations, allowing both him and his descendants to maintain significant influence over Jewish religious and political life. This continuity of power between Annas, his sons, and eventually his son-in-law Caiaphas reflects the interweaving of religious and political authority during that time. With the high priesthood serving as both a spiritual office and a position of substantial worldly influence. Caiaphas was known for his political savvy and his skill at navigating the delicate balance between Roman demands and Jewish religious interests. He understood the political dynamics of the time, which placed him in a privileged position, as he managed to keep Rome's favor while also maintaining control within the temple. His role in the trial of Jesus was pivotal. In the Gospel of John, Caiaphas is quoted as saying that it would be better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to suffer. John 11, verse 50. This pragmatic view led him to see Jesus as a destabilizing figure whose growing popularity could provoke a rebellion, which in turn might invite a harsh response from Rome that would threaten the Jewish people's safety and autonomy. The religious background of figures like Annas and Caiaphas also played a role in their opposition to Jesus. Both men were associated with the Sadducees, a Jewish sect that denied the resurrection of the dead and was more concerned with preserving the status quo than embracing spiritual renewal. This materialistic, politically focused mindset put them at odds with Jesus' teachings about the kingdom of God, resurrection, and judgment. The Gospels depict Annas and Caiaphas as figures who were not only driven by a desire for power, but also by deep-seated theological convictions that made them wary of any challenge to their authority, especially one as radical as Jesus' message of salvation and resurrection. As Jesus' influence grew, Annas and Caiaphas felt their own authority slipping. The crowds that gathered to hear Jesus teach and witness his miracles began to question the legitimacy of the established religious leadership. This growing popular support for Jesus deeply unsettled Annas and Caiaphas, who feared that they were losing control over the people. According to the Gospels, this fear was one of the primary factors behind their decision to arrest Jesus. In Mark 14 verse 1-2, we see that the chief priests, including Caiaphas, were actively looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth, as they feared a public backlash during the Passover festival, a time when Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims. In this highly charged environment, Annas and Caiaphas became the key architects of the plot to eliminate Jesus. Their goal was to neutralize what they perceived as a dangerous threat to the religious and political status quo. Roman occupation had already created a volatile atmosphere in Judea, and the religious leaders knew that any movement that seemed to rally the people could be seen as a potential uprising. Jesus, with his message of hope and his miracles, seemed to have the power to inspire the masses. This was not only a theological issue for Annas and Caiaphas, but a political one as well, as they feared that Jesus' popularity might provoke a rebellion and, consequently, a violent crackdown from Rome. The fear of a possible uprising wasn't merely a religious concern, it was also a matter of political stability. If the Romans perceived a popular leader gaining influence, they would likely respond with force to prevent any sign of rebellion. Annas and Caiaphas were keenly aware of this, so they devised a plan to arrest Jesus quietly, without creating a public spectacle. They needed a way to capture him that would avoid inciting the crowds, especially during the Passover, when tensions were high. This was where Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' disciples, entered the picture. Judas, motivated by disappointment, greed, or perhaps a mix of both, agreed to betray Jesus in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, as noted in Matthew 26, verse 14-16. This betrayal provided Annas and Caiaphas with the perfect opportunity to apprehend Jesus without drawing public attention. They planned for the arrest to occur at night in the Garden of Gethsemane, a secluded place away from the protective presence of the crowd. According to Matthew 26, verse 47-50, Judas led an armed group sent by the chief priests to the garden, where he identified Jesus with a kiss, signaling to the authorities that he was the one they sought. The plan worked smoothly. Jesus was captured in the quiet of night, far from the crowds that might have otherwise come to his defense. After the arrest, Jesus was first brought to Annas, illustrating the former high priest's lingering influence over the religious and political processes of the time. John 18, verse 12-13, describes how Annas questioned Jesus, probing him about his teachings and his followers, perhaps seeking grounds to justify the arrest. Once Annas was done, Jesus was handed over to Caiaphas, the current high priest, who would bring him before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council of religious leaders. Caiaphas took charge of Jesus' trial, determined to present him as a danger to public order and, by extension, to the stability of the Jewish nation under Roman rule. During the trial, false witnesses were brought in to accuse Jesus of blasphemy, claiming he had said he could destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Mark 14, verse 57-59. Finally, Caiaphas directly questioned Jesus, asking him if he was the Messiah, the Son of God. When Jesus confirmed it, the council interpreted this as blasphemy, a crime punishable by death according to Jewish law. However, Judea was under Roman occupation, and the Sanhedrin did not have the authority to impose a death sentence. Therefore, they brought Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, to have the sentence approved and carried out. Caiaphas and the other religious leaders presented Jesus to Pilate as a rebel who claimed to be the king of the Jews, framing him as a political threat to Roman authority. Luke 23 verse 1-2 captures this tactic, as the religious leaders leveraged Pilate's concern over any possible insurrection to press for Jesus' execution. Caiaphas's political savvy was evident as he manipulated the narrative, presenting Jesus as a rebel against Rome. Pilate, initially reluctant, was eventually swayed by the pressure from both the religious authorities and the crowd. Finally, he handed Jesus over to be crucified. The charge was King of the Jews, a political accusation that justified the execution under Roman law. For Caiaphas and Annas, the primary goal was to eliminate the threat Jesus posed to their authority and maintain stability in their relationship with the Romans. Jesus' crucifixion was, therefore, a profoundly political decision. Annas and Caiaphas, by orchestrating the trial and influencing Pilate, ensured Jesus' execution, which they believed was necessary to preserve their positions and the stability of the region. From their perspective, Jesus' death was a solution to prevent any uprising that might provoke Rome's wrath. However, the crucifixion became a turning point, symbolizing the tension between the established religious order and the emerging Christian movement. After Jesus' crucifixion, his resurrection, as recounted in the Gospels, placed Caiaphas in a precarious position. The resurrection not only challenged the authority of the religious leaders, but also validated Jesus' message, suggesting he was indeed the Messiah. This would have undermined all the authority that Caiaphas and his family had worked to preserve. In the Gospel of Matthew, it's noted that when the soldiers guarding Jesus' tomb reported the resurrection, Caiaphas and the other leaders bribed them to spread the story that Jesus' disciples had stolen his body. Matthew 28, verse 12-15. This incident reveals the extent of Caiaphas' denial, a refusal rooted not just in theology but in a political need to maintain control. The resurrection wasn't just a miraculous event, it was a direct validation of Jesus' teachings and claims. For Caiaphas, accepting the resurrection would have meant admitting he had condemned the true Messiah. Thus, his resistance was both a theological and political maneuver to protect the authority of the priestly elite. This denial exemplifies the lengths to which Caiaphas would go to retain power, reflecting a desperate attempt to suppress a growing movement that could destabilize his control over the Jewish people. Even after Jesus' death, Caiaphas continued to oppose the early Christian movement. As Christian communities began to grow, he faced a new challenge. The book of Acts describes his role in the persecution of early Christians, including the martyrdom of Stephen. Stephen was arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin, where he delivered a powerful speech defending his faith in Jesus, provoking anger among the religious leaders. Caiaphas, likely presiding over the council as high priest, would have supported the decision to stone Stephen, as recounted in Acts 7, verse 54-60. The persecution wasn't limited to prominent figures like Stephen. Caiaphas likely authorized the arrests of other followers of Jesus as well. In Acts 4, Peter and John were brought before the Sanhedrin after healing a lame man, and Caiaphas was present. Despite attempts at intimidation, Peter boldly declared, "We must obey God rather than men." Acts 5 verse 29, reflecting the resolve of the apostles to continue preaching about Jesus' resurrection. This defiance marked a growing tension between the early Christians and the authority of the high priest. Matthew 26 verse 63-66. Annas, too, retained influence even after Jesus' crucifixion. As the patriarch of a priestly dynasty, his authority persisted, even though he no longer held the high priest's title. His reputation for corruption and his excessive focus on religious rituals made him a divisive figure. The power he built around his family continued to shape the religious landscape of Jerusalem, highlighting the resilience of the structures he established. However, Judea's political landscape shifted dramatically over the following decades. In 70 CE, the Jewish revolt, also known as the Great Revolt, erupted. Roman interference in local affairs, coupled with oppressive economic policies and corrupt governance, fueled widespread resentment. Tensions reached a breaking point in 66 CE when the Roman governor Gessius Florus plundered the temple treasury, an act that outraged the Jewish population and ignited the conflict. The revolt initially saw the Jews expel the Roman garrison from Jerusalem and establish a provisional government, but the Roman response was swift and brutal. Emperor Vespasian dispatched his son Titus to suppress the rebellion, and Roman forces methodically conquered Judea's major cities. By 70 CE, they had laid siege to Jerusalem, leading to a prolonged and devastating conflict. Famine, disease, and internal strife ravaged the city. When the Romans finally breached Jerusalem's defenses, they sacked the city and destroyed the temple, an event with lasting spiritual and political consequences. The temple's destruction had a profound impact on the Jewish people, marking the end of their central place of worship and a shift in their communal identity. Many were killed, others were sold into slavery, and the survivors were dispersed throughout the Roman Empire, beginning a diaspora that would last centuries. Amidst this chaos, Annas was reportedly killed, a casualty of the revolt. The historian Flavius Josephus recounts that the Romans targeted prominent Jewish leaders like Annas to dismantle any remaining resistance and consolidate their control over Judea. This violent end marked the conclusion of Annas's life, but the legacy of his influence and the dynasty he established continued to resonate in the religious and political memory of Judea. Annas's role in the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion and his ongoing opposition to the early Christian movement cemented his place as one of the most remembered and controversial figures in Jewish religious history. Through his family, he had built a power structure within the priesthood that left a lasting impact, shaping the religious hierarchy and political alliances of his time. As for Caiaphas, his fate carried its own air of mystery. Decades after the events of Jesus' crucifixion, an archaeological discovery would shed light on his life and potentially his final resting place. In southern Jerusalem, a family tomb was uncovered, containing ornately decorated ossuaries or bone boxes, one of which bore the inscription, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas." This discovery sparked considerable interest and debate, as it appeared to confirm the existence of the high priest who played a central role in Jesus' trial and execution. The inscription on the ossuary, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas," is widely regarded by many scholars as strong evidence that this is indeed the tomb of the high priest Caiaphas, a conclusion supported by historical accounts from the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. Josephus documented Caiaphas as the high priest active during Jesus' time and involved in his trial. However, some scholars have raised questions about the authenticity of the discovery, suggesting that the inscription might have been forged, or that it could belong to another individual with a similar name. This debate over the tomb's authenticity remains unresolved and continues to divide scholars to this day. The scholarly debate surrounding Caiaphas's tomb involves not only the reliability of the inscription, but also the dating of the ossuaries and their connection to historical records. While the authenticity of the tomb may still be uncertain, the discovery provides a fascinating glimpse into the lives of religious leaders during Jesus' and the enduring impact of figures like Caiaphas on history and faith traditions. For believers, the implications of such an archaeological finding serve to deepen the historical context of the gospel narratives, illustrating the intersection between biblical accounts and tangible history. The consequences of the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion extended beyond Caiaphas and Annas. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who ultimately sanctioned Jesus' execution, would also face repercussions that marked a turning point in his own life and career. While Pilate attempted to maintain political stability by yielding to public pressure and approving Jesus' crucifixion, this decision ultimately contributed to his downfall. Known for his harsh and oppressive rule, Pilate had a reputation for brutality, which only exacerbated tensions in the already volatile region of Judea. Pilate's history of violent actions against the Jewish people only served to deepen the resentment toward him. In one notable incident mentioned in Luke 13 verse 1, Pilate was reported to have mixed the blood of certain Galileans with their sacrifices, a shocking act that provoked outrage among the Jewish population. This heavy-handed and insensitive approach to governance escalated popular dissatisfaction with his rule. And over time, Pilate found it increasingly difficult to manage the political and religious unrest in Judea. The growing unrest, combined with his inability to effectively suppress resistance, led to Pilate's removal from office in 36 CE. He was summoned back to Rome to answer charges brought against him by the Samaritans after a controversial incident in which his troops violently suppressed a religious gathering that was perceived as a threat. Unfortunately for Pilate, Emperor Tiberius, who might have defended him, had died shortly before his arrival, leaving Pilate in an even more vulnerable position. This marked the end of his political career, and the Bible does not record Pilate's final fate, leaving it shrouded in historical ambiguity. Various traditions and apocryphal sources provide different accounts of Pilate's ultimate fate. According to one such account, the Acts of Pilate, Pilate reportedly committed suicide after being summoned back to Rome, preferring death over the prospect of facing punishment. Another tradition suggests that Pilate was executed under Emperor Nero's reign, years after his fall from power, although this story remains largely unsubstantiated. These traditions, while speculative, highlight the lingering infamy of Pilate's actions and the moral questions that have haunted his legacy. In 1961, a significant archaeological find added a new dimension to our understanding of Pilate. During excavations at Caesarea Maritima, a team led by Dr. Antonio Frova unearthed a limestone plaque bearing an inscription in Latin that read, "Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, dedicated a temple to the people of Caesarea in honor of Tiberius." This inscription was a rare and valuable confirmation of Pilate's role as governor of Judea under Emperor Tiberius, providing tangible historical evidence that aligns with the biblical and historical accounts of his presence in Judea. This artifact not only corroborates Pilate's historical existence, but also provides insight into his political role and activities as governor. In the Gospel of Luke, Pilate is identified as the Roman governor of Judea during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, and this plaque substantiates that identification, offering a glimpse of the administrative duties Pilate undertook. The inscription reinforces the historical reality of the biblical narrative, bridging the gap between scripture and archaeology, and inviting deeper reflection on Pilate's role in Jesus' trial and the complex moral and political dynamics at play. The plaque's discovery invites reflection on Pilate's character and the choices he made. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus speaks of light and darkness as metaphors for moral clarity and confusion. Matthew 6, verse 22-23 says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness." This teaching underscores the importance of moral perception and the consequences of clouded judgment. Light symbolizes truth and wisdom, while darkness represents ignorance and moral blindness. Pilate's actions serve as an illustration of how political pressure and moral indecision can lead to tragic outcomes. Though he was warned by his conscience and even by his wife, who experienced a troubling dream about Jesus, Matthew 27, verse 19, Pilate ultimately surrendered to the demands of the crowd, choosing political convenience over justice. His symbolic act of washing his hands, an attempt to absolve himself of responsibility, stands as a testament to his inner conflict. However, history shows that this gesture did not exonerate him, as he still bears the moral weight of his decision. The stories of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate reveal complex aspects of human nature, power, and the ways in which individual choices can align with a larger, often unseen plan. Each of these figures played a pivotal role in the events that led to Jesus' crucifixion, and each acted out of motives rooted in ambition, fear, or self-preservation. Yet unknowingly, their actions aligned with a divine purpose that transcended their personal intentions. In this way, their lives serve as reminders of how human failings can ultimately serve a higher plan. For Annas, his relentless pursuit of control and influence over the Temple of Jerusalem illustrates a common human tendency to cling to power, sometimes at the expense of integrity. As high priest, he focused more on preserving his status and wealth than on upholding justice and faith in God. Annas symbolizes the temptation to prioritize personal gain over true devotion. He played a direct role in Jesus' trial without recognizing the significance of the figure before him. In our own lives, we too may overlook moments of profound importance in our pursuit of security or success. Caiaphas, on the other hand, embodies political pragmatism taken to an extreme. His decision to sacrifice Jesus for the good of the people reflects a type of human reasoning that without spiritual insight can lead to devastating consequences. He saw Jesus as a threat to the stability of his position and his relationship with the Romans, but failed to perceive the truth in Jesus' teachings. Caiaphas' story reminds us of the dangers of prioritizing short-term security over enduring truth, and how sometimes what we view as a solution may be part of a larger plan beyond our understanding. Pontius Pilate, by contrast, represents the dangers of indecision and moral weakness. Though he recognized Jesus' innocence, he allowed the crowd and political circumstances to dictate his actions. His famous hand-washing symbolized his attempt to escape accountability, but it did not absolve him. Like Pilate, we may also find ourselves torn between what we know to be right and the pressures of our environment. Pilate's story is a warning about the consequences of moral cowardice, an avoidance of difficult choices that ultimately leads to personal ruin. The deaths of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate reveal that, despite their moral failings, their actions were woven into a greater plan. The crucifixion of Jesus, an event they helped to orchestrate, was not a chaotic or random tragedy, but rather the fulfillment of a divine plan of redemption. This narrative serves as a powerful reminder that, while we bear responsibility for our choices, God has the power to work even through our mistakes to bring about a greater good. His sovereignty means that no action, right or wrong, is beyond his ability to use for a greater purpose. This perspective doesn't relieve us of our moral responsibility, but it reassures us that even our darkest moments can be redeemed. In his infinite wisdom, God is able to transform human failings into opportunities for grace and renewal, turning moments of weakness into stepping stones for his divine plan. The stories of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate are profound reminders that whether we realize it or not, each of us plays a role in a larger narrative that extends beyond our personal ambitions or fears. Annas' life, for instance, illustrates the dangers of clinging too tightly to worldly power and prestige. In his relentless pursuit of control over the temple and its operations, he became a figure more focused on maintaining authority than on fulfilling the true spiritual responsibilities of his role. His drive to safeguard his influence blinded him to the spiritual truths unfolding before him. Annas, in his unwavering quest to preserve his family's power, couldn't recognize the significance of Jesus. His story invites us to reflect on how often we allow our pursuit of security, status, or influence to obscure what truly matters: justice, compassion, and faith. Caiaphas, too, teaches a lesson about the limitations of human pragmatism and political calculation. His decision to sacrifice Jesus for the good of the people seemed logical from a certain perspective. He believed he was safeguarding his nation's stability by removing a figure who, in his view, posed a potential threat to the delicate balance between the Jews and their Roman overlords. Yet, in prioritizing political expediency over moral truth, Caiaphas failed to see the larger, spiritual reality of Jesus' message. His actions, though calculated, ended up fulfilling a divine purpose he could never have anticipated. Caiaphas' story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of placing worldly logic above spiritual discernment, reminding us that sometimes what seems like the most practical choice may conflict with the deeper truth. Pilate's journey, on the other hand, exemplifies the perils of moral compromise and indecision. Although he found no guilt in Jesus and sensed the injustice of condemning an innocent man, Pilate ultimately allowed himself to be swayed by public opinion and political pressure. His infamous act of washing his hands was a symbolic gesture meant to declare his innocence, but history remembers him as the governor who permitted an unjust execution. Pilate's reluctance to take a stand reveals how yielding to external pressures can lead us down a path of moral failure. His story warns us that avoiding difficult decisions or refusing to take responsibility doesn't absolve us of the consequences. Together, the lives and choices of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate converge in the crucifixion of Jesus, an event that would forever change the course of history. Through their actions, they unintentionally set into motion the fulfillment of a divine plan that was greater than any of them could comprehend. What they saw as a necessary step to protect their positions or maintain political order, God used as the foundation for the ultimate act of redemption. The crucifixion, an event marked by betrayal, fear, and injustice, became the means through which salvation was offered to humanity. For believers, this story serves as a reminder of the mysterious ways in which God works, often using flawed individuals and seemingly tragic events to accomplish his purposes. While Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate each acted out of self-interest, fear, or political necessity, their actions became part of a redemptive arc that extended far beyond their individual intentions. This narrative encourages us to trust in God's sovereignty, knowing that he can bring about good even through the darkest circumstances. Reflecting on the legacy of these three men, we're reminded that our choices, big or small, carry weight beyond our immediate understanding. Annas' pursuit of power, Caiaphas' political pragmatism, and Pilate's moral weakness all serve as cautionary examples, showing how easily we can be led astray by ambition, fear, or the desire for convenience. Yet in the Christian faith, these failures are not seen as the end of the story. Instead, they are part of a larger narrative that demonstrates the possibility of redemption, the potential for even the most flawed actions to contribute to a greater good. Annas' legacy, particularly, speaks to the human tendency to become consumed by the pursuit of earthly power. His influence over the temple was immense, and he sought to extend that control through his family, creating a dynasty that would last generations. Yet, his story serves as a reminder that earthly power is ultimately fleeting. Despite his efforts to secure his family's position, the events of Jesus' crucifixion and the subsequent rise of Christianity diminished the influence that Annas and his descendants held. His life invites us to consider where we place our priorities, whether we seek power and control for their own sake or strive to fulfill a higher calling. Caiaphas' pragmatism, while effective in the short term, ultimately backfired as well. His calculated decision to eliminate Jesus to prevent potential conflict with Rome appeared to solve a problem, but it led to an outcome far beyond his control. The very movement he sought to quash only grew stronger after Jesus' death, as his followers spread the message of the resurrection. Caiaphas' story encourages us to think about the long-term impact of our choices, reminding us that actions motivated purely by practicality, without consideration for moral or spiritual values, may have unintended consequences. Pilate's legacy, meanwhile, is one of moral failure. He had the authority to release Jesus, yet chose to yield to the crowd rather than uphold justice. His decision illustrates the danger of prioritizing self-preservation over righteousness. Even his attempt to symbolically wash away his responsibility did not prevent him from being remembered as complicit in the crucifixion. Pilate's story reminds us of the importance of courage and integrity, especially when facing difficult choices. It's a lesson on the importance of standing up for what is right, even when doing so may be unpopular or risky. The stories of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate also serve as reminders that, while we may try to control outcomes, there is a greater plan at work that we cannot always understand. Their actions, driven by human motives, became part of a divine tapestry that ultimately led to the resurrection, a foundational event in Christianity. This belief that God can work through human failings is a source of hope for many, affirming that our mistakes are not beyond the reach of grace. God's ability to weave redemption from the threads of human error highlights his sovereignty and the depth of his love. For the early Christian community, the events surrounding the crucifixion underscored the belief that God's plan cannot be thwarted by human schemes. The very leaders who sought to silence Jesus inadvertently played a role in spreading his message. What they intended as a final act of suppression became the catalyst for a movement that would spread across the world. The crucifixion and resurrection became symbols of hope and transformation, demonstrating that God's purposes transcend human intentions. As we consider these narratives today, they invite us to examine our own lives and choices. The ambition of Annas, the pragmatism of Caiaphas, and the indecision of Pilate are temptations that still resonate with us. We too may be tempted to seek control, prioritize convenience, or avoid difficult decisions. Yet the story of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection offers an alternative path, a call to pursue truth, integrity, and faith, trusting that God's purposes are ultimately for our good. These reflections on Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate remind us that, despite our flaws, we are invited to be part of God's redemptive work in the world. Their lives show us both the pitfalls of human nature and the incredible ways in which God can use even our failures. The crucifixion, though it appeared to be the end of Jesus' ministry, became the cornerstone of a faith that continues to inspire billions. If this story has stirred you or led you to reflect on your own journey and how you respond to challenges, consider delving deeper into the Bible for more insights into these complex and transformative stories. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and continue exploring the timeless lessons of faith, redemption, and wisdom found in Scripture. Thank you for watching. May you find encouragement in these stories and strength to face your own journey. Blessings to you all, and may God's peace be with you.